We will continue to rapidly deplete Iran's ability to threaten freedom of navigation in and around the Strait of Hormuz.
50 years ago, Saudi Arabia had foreseen that this crisis would arise. When the entire world was in a state of fear due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, Saudi Arabia was already in possession of a pipeline that was ready to be utilized. The route is 1,200 kilometers long and runs through the center of the desert. It begins at Abqaiq, which is Saudi Arabia's largest oil processing facility, and ends at Yanbu, which is located on the shore of the Red Sea. This route stays away from the Strait of Hormuz and never comes into contact with the Persian Gulf. Tanker assaults during the Iran-Iraq conflict are responsible for the destruction of the Gulf region in the early 1980s. Ships were being sunk, ports were being bombarded, and the oil traffic was being suspended. There was a question that was softly voiced in Riyadh, but no one paid any attention to it. What should we do if the Strait of Hormuz were to close a dual pipeline that has a length of 1,200 kilometers was the solution. The Saudi Arabian government began the construction of a pipeline in a stealthy manner in 1981. 45 years later, the day had finally arrived when Iran would permanently seal the Strait of Hormuz. For several decades, Iran has made threats to cut off the supply of oil to the rest of the globe. Moreover, a project that was ingeniously conceived and quietly developed several decades ago is now closing the straits, which have been Iran's most powerful trump card for a very long time. The Persian Gulf is connected to the rest of the world by the Strait of Hormuz, which is a canal that is only 21 miles wide and is extremely narrow. Over 21 million barrels of oil are transported through this tight passageway on a daily basis, which accounts for 1/5 of the total maritime trade worldwide. It is via this strait that oil and natural gas are transported from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Iran. Iran has control over the northern shore of the lifeblood that is the world economy. It is the lifeblood of the global economy. The narrowest section of the strait, which is 21 miles in length, is so near to the Iranian shoreline that any tanker might be hit by a missile fired from the beach within minutes. Mines, speedboats, coastal defense batteries, and kamikaze drones are all examples of asymmetric weaponry that Iran possesses. These weapons were developed specifically for this geographical area. When it comes to the vast ocean, major naval countries may have the upper hand. Nevertheless, when it comes to this tight strait, the terrain puts Iran in a better position. Over the course of several decades, this has been Tehran's most powerful power. Should you hit us, we will shut down the Strait of Hormuz and bring the economy of the entire world to a halt. The West's reluctance to intervene militarily against Iran was mostly due to the threat brought up by this situation. Because everyone was aware that if the Strait of Hormuz were to close, the price of oil would see a meteoric rise, supply lines would break down, and inflation would surge. That was a risk that nobody wanted to embrace. From now till February 2026, the Iranian government used that card on March 4th. On the orders of the Revolutionary Guards, the strait was declared closed. It was stated that any ships that attempted to cross would be consumed by fire. They did not fail to follow through. On March 12th, there were 21 verified attacks on commercial vessels, which resulted in the deaths of 5 crew members. Attacks on commercial vessels began. There was a 70% decrease in the number of tanker traffic, and more than 150 ships anchored outside the strait. The war risk insurance policy was terminated. Brent crude went from $65 to $104 in a single day. The International Energy Agency, IEA, estimates that the worldwide oil supply loss for this month is 8 million barrels per day, making it the greatest energy disruption in the history of the world. In addition, the situation that Iran has been threatening over the past 4 decades has at long last materialized. Exactly in the midst of all of this mayhem, Saudi Arabia made a move that came into play: the fuel of choice. This is the East-West pipeline for crude oil. Even if the name is unremarkable, the effect is enormous. Construction started in the year 1981. Over the course of several years, its holding capacity was raised to 7 million barrels. On the other hand, the pipeline was never used to its full capacity. Prior to the crisis, it was only capable of transporting 2.8 million barrels per day. The term overinvestment was used by some. To me, it appeared like an insurance premium that was not essential. Amin Nasser, the CEO of Aramco, made the announcement on March 10, 2026, that the pipeline is being brought up to full capacity, which is the capacity of 7 million barrels per day. Instead of going through the Strait of Hormuz, the majority of Saudi Arabia's oil exports are now traveling through the Red Sea. An investment that was considered to be unneeded for 45 years has suddenly become a vital resource for the economy of the entire world. The pipeline, which had been carrying 2.8 million barrels per day before to the crisis, increased to its maximum capacity in a matter of days. This indicates that Aramco had been responsible for the pipeline's maintenance testing infrastructure and expansion capacity for a considerable amount of time. It is more accurate to say that the Saudis did more than just lay the pipeline. Over the course of 45 years, they made certain that it could be activated at any time. And Saudi Arabia is not the only country in this regard. Additionally, between 1.5 and 1.8 million barrels are transported each day through the Habshan Fujairah pipeline, which is located in the United Arab Emirates and extends from Abu Dhabi fields to the Gulf of Oman. Additionally, it avoids crossing the Strait of Hormuz. An alternate capacity of between 8.5 and 9 million barrels per day is provided by the two pipelines when they are combined. It is not possible to account for the entire 21 million barrels that are transported via the Strait of Hormuz. On the other hand, let's put the figures into point of view. It is estimated that Saudi Arabia exports around 7 million barrels every single day. The Strait of Hormuz is no longer affected by practically all of that which is now independent. That is to say, Saudi Arabian oil is still being exported to other countries. Even Saudi Arabia is not being affected by the issue. It is affecting nations that do not have any other avenues available. 3.3 million barrels are shipped out of Iraq every single day, and all of these exports are dependent on the Strait of Hormuz. The 2 million barrels that Kuwait possesses are in the same predicament. Massive LNG exports from Qatar, which account for 25% of the world's total LNG commerce, are required to travel via the Strait of Hormuz, but they are currently entirely suspended. Unlike Saudi Arabia, these countries do not have a backup plan just in case. Several years ago, they conducted an analysis of similar bypass schemes and ultimately decided to discontinue them. The expense was excessive, and it was speculated that the Strait of Hormuz would never cease to exist in its current form. In the year 2026, it became clear how incorrect that assumption was. Although oil has surpassed $100, it has not yet reached $200. The economy of the entire world is in a state of turmoil, yet it has not completely collapsed. The pipelines that were buried in the desert 45 years ago are the primary reason for this particular situation. It has been Iran's policy for the past 4 decades to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Indeed, it did. Now we are dealing with the repercussions. Geostrategically speaking, the regime has been brought down. In accordance with the statements made by Admiral Cooper, the head of CENTCOM, there is not a single Iranian warship that is now operating in the Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, or the Gulf of Oman. More than 100 Iranian warships have been damaged or sunk. All of Iran's naval capabilities have been completely eliminated. A single night was all it took to destroy all of the defense systems that existed on Karg Island. A total of 90 military objectives were eliminated in just 2 hours by B-2, B-52, B-1. The evaluation made by the Secretary of Defense of the United States, Hegseth, is much more severe. 90% of Iran's missile inventory has been reduced. The company has reduced the number of single-use drones by 95%. Iran's desperate maneuvers in the Strait of Hormuz are the source of our current predicament. Rather of depending on its military capabilities, the regime is now relying on its ability to survive. Iran has retaliated against its own partners in terms of geopolitics. The Strait of Hormuz was the route that 45% of China's oil shipments took. At this time, Beijing is exerting pressure on Iran to open the strait. Even though Qatar's LNG is dependent on the Strait of Hormuz, this dependency has also been eliminated. A pragmatic approach was used by India, which resulted in the acquisition of transit authority through a bilateral arrangement with Iran. Short-term victory has been achieved by Russia. The demand for Russian oil has increased, which has led to an increase in the price of oil. Nevertheless, Moscow will also be affected by the global slump. Although Iran's goal was to cause harm to its adversaries, it has instead alienated its own allies. And the geo-economic part is the one that causes the most suffering. Through the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, Iran has not only constrained the flow of oil from other countries, but also its own. With a daily loss of 2 to 3 million barrels of exports, the stockpile of foreign currency reserves is decreasing. Inflation is soaring to new heights. Possible outcomes include a decrease in GDP of up to 22%. 40% of the regime's budget was comprised of earnings from oil sales. Now that revenue is very close to being nil, the sanctions are becoming more severe. The value of the rial has reached all-time lows. The Iranian government is unable to offer shelter for the millions of people who are fleeing their homes and heading north because the state treasury does not have enough money. The dictatorship used a strategy of mutual destruction to achieve its goals. The world will be destroyed by me, but I will bring it down with me. The rates of destruction, however, are not always the same. A global disaster was avoided as a result of the Saudi bypass. The strategic reserves of the United States are in play. Both Asia and Europe were rocked, but they did not completely collapse. On the other hand, Iran was deprived of its military capabilities, naval might, oil earnings, and the influence it had over the Strait of Hormuz. To put it another way, it was mostly destroyed by the activities that it took himself. The statement made by the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, which states that we are permitting Iranian vessels, is the apex of this irony. The consent of Iran's adversaries is now necessary for Iran to be able to sell its own oil to the rest of the world. The regime not only shut down the strait, but it also gave over the control of its own oil to the United States government. Iran has maintained over the past 4 decades that the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is our nuclear weapon. This weapon was utilized, and the weapon ended up being ineffective. China is the actor that has been hurt the worst by this crisis. In its capacity as the largest oil importer in the world, it obtained 45% of its imports through the Strait of Hormuz. Because of the closure of the straits, this flow has been halted. There is a varied response from Beijing. Pressure from the diplomatic community on Iran to reopen the strait, increasing connections with Saudi Arabia, and turning toward alternate energy sources are all things that are being considered. Refined fuels are no longer allowed to be exported from China. There is an effort being made to safeguard its own stockpiles. However, the difficulty that China is facing is not confined to the Strait of Hormuz. It was determined earlier that the Venezuela route was shut down in the month of January. Pressure is being applied to Russia. Blockade has been placed on Iran. Over the course of the previous half year, China has made a concerted effort to decrease its reliance on its three primary alternative oil sources. In addition, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz will lead to the cessation of oil exports from Iran. Additionally, Qatari LNG, which is an important source of natural gas imports for China, comes to a halt. It is fascinating to see how China has responded to Trump's proposal for a coalition in Hormuz. It is not joining, but rather it is acting independently in negotiations with Iran. It has been reported by Reuters that China is currently having conversations with Iran over crude oil as well as the safe passage of Qatari LNG vessels. In order to avoid joining the coalition led by the United States, Beijing is working to establish bilateral agreements with Iran in order to ensure its own energy security. Also, the United States is aware that these conversations are now taking place. According to the trade discussions that took place in Paris between Beijing and China, the United States government does not wish to fully alienate Beijing. This is the most recent and complicated aspect of the battle between the United States and China on the energy front. The situation on a worldwide scale is bleak. According to the International Energy Agency, IEA, the global oil supply shortfall for this month is estimated to be 8 million barrels per day. In spite of the fact that a strategic reserve of 400 million barrels has been released, it is not sufficient. WTI is currently trading in the area of $95 to $100, while Brent is currently trading at $104. Asia is experiencing a gas crisis. Europe is experiencing inflation, and developing countries are facing the possibility of stagflation. Metals, agriculture, fertilizer, and the automobile industry are all experiencing a series of blows that are causing a chain reaction. It is estimated by the Congressional Research Service that the loss of global GDP may reach trillions of dollars in the event that a war were to last for an extended period of time. It is clear that the United States government believes that this crisis is only transitory, as evidenced by the prediction made by Treasury Secretary Besin that oil prices will fall below $80 once the conflict is over. However, when will the war come to an end? Approximately 3 more weeks, according to Israel. According to Trump, it will be over very soon. We will defend ourselves for as long as it is required, according to Iran's Minister of Foreign Affairs. The petrol line in Saudi Arabia is preventing a catastrophe on a global scale, but it is not without its flaws. To begin, there is an inadequate capacity. In the past, the Strait of Hormuz was utilized to transport 21 million barrels of oil every single day. Less than half of the loss is accounted for by the Saudi-UAE bypass, which amounts to 8.5 to 9 million barrels. Iraq, Kuwait, and Qatar do not have any other routes available to them. These nations continue to rely on the Strait of Hormuz as their primary source of oil. Second, the path that goes through the Red Sea is not risk-free. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait is under attack from the Houthis, and the Yanbu port, that is accessible by the pipeline, is located on the coast of the Red Sea. In addition, Iran could pose a threat to the Red Sea by means of the Houthis. The Houthis have started launching attacks against commercial ships since the year 2024. However, the Bab el-Mandeb risk is still present, despite the fact that the Saudi bypass reduces the Strait of Hormuz risk. Furthermore, the pipeline itself is susceptible to attack. A piece of infrastructure that is 1,200 kilometers long and runs through the midst of the desert is vulnerable to strikes from missiles or drones flying overhead. A temporary halt was placed on 50% of Saudi output as a result of the Houthi attack in 2019, which targeted the Abqaiq facilities. It's possible that the same situation will occur again. Furthermore, recent events have brought this vulnerability into sharper light than it was previously. Saudi Arabia made the announcement on March 16th that it had successfully intercepted 35 Iranian drones that were aiming for its eastern region, which is the region that houses important oil infrastructure. Additionally, on the same day, a fuel store located close to Dubai International Airport caught fire as a result of an attack by a drone. Not only is Iran seeking to target the strait, but it is also attempting to strike the exit points using bypass routes. The alternative, that is Oman, has also been the object of attention. In the month of March, drone assaults were specifically directed at the deep sea ports of Duqm and Salalah, which are located outside of the strait. Damage was committed to a fuel depot located in Duqm. In the meantime, the port of Soha was located inside a region that insurers have defined as an area of high risk for war. Iran is making every effort to guarantee that none of the alternate routes will continue to be secure. Petroleum's existence, however, has significantly altered the rules of the game, despite all of these potential dangers. This assumption made by Iran that if I seal the strait, the world will come to an end was proven to be incorrect. The globe was jolted, yet it did not completely topple over. Consequently, this indicates that Iran's final strategic trump card has lost a significant amount of its significance. In the realm of geopolitics, the petroleum narrative exemplifies the significance of thinking in the long run. They installed 1,200 kilometers of pipeline beneath the desert in 1981, while they were in the thick of a conflict, in order to get ready for a potential problem in the future. Over the course of 45 years, the pipeline remained in its half-used state, never attaining its full capacity. Some others considered it to be an expendable investment. In the year 2026, the pipeline was brought online in a matter of seconds, just as the crisis was about to occur. It is possible to avoid a global disaster by avoiding the Strait of Hormuz and delivering 7 million barrels per day. Iran stated that they would seal the Strait of Hormuz for a period of 40 years. For 4 decades, Saudi Arabia has been quietly preparing. This threat was used by Iran. This plan was utilized by Saudi Arabia. It turned out that the plan was more effective than the threat. However, this is not the end of the narrative. The strait continues to exist in a state of limbo, neither shutting nor opening completely. Through the use of its selective transit policy, Iran is turning diplomacy into a weapon. Trump is making an effort to form a coalition, but his allies are hesitant to support him. It is China that is determining its own path. The price of oil is currently higher than $100. The Strait of Hormuz continues to be an important factor for both Qatar and Iraq. Not nearly half of the overall demand is represented by the bypass roads. Nor does anyone know when the battle will come to an end. Iran's ability to play the Strait of Hormuz card has been irreversibly undermined, and this is one thing that can be said with absolute certainty. Pipes that were buried beneath the desert 45 years ago have to a significant extent eliminated 40 years' worth of danger. In spite of the fact that Saudi Arabia did not completely shut off Iran's throat, it did throw Iran's throat card away. In addition, the beginning of one of the most significant chapters of that event is the installation of a pipeline beneath the desert in the year 1981. To that end, what are your thoughts on the matter at hand? The comments section is open for you to share your ideas. We ask that you subscribe to our channel and make sure that alerts are turned on so that you may remain up to date on the exclusive insights that Conflict Report provides. Thank you for selecting our